Welcome to This Explainer, where we're going to take a fascinating, fully zoomed-in journey through the mechanics of the world's largest democracy. Seriously, if you've ever wondered how an entire subcontinent full of such incredibly diverse voices actually manages to govern itself, well, you are absolutely in the right place. We're going to break down the massive machinery that makes it all possible, and honestly, more importantly, we'll talk about exactly where you fit into the whole picture.
Okay, to kick things off, let's dive right into this absolutely mind-boggling number. 96.8 crore. That is the number of registered voters in India as of 2024. I mean, just let that sink in for a second, right? That is literally more people voting in Indian elections than the total population of several other countries combined. This number right here, it establishes the unmatched, incredible scale of what we're talking about today. When we talk about Indian democracy, we're not just talking about politics. We are talking about the single largest participatory civic exercise in human history.
So to make sense of something this colossal, here is our game plan for today. We'll be covering the macro scale, core principles, democratic systems, living democracy, challenges to democratic practices, and finally, democracy and you.
Let's get started with Section 1, the macro scale, tracing democratic roots.
You know, it's so easy to think of democracy as some relatively modern invention, right? Maybe something brought over during colonial times. But looking at this timeline, India's democratic ethos is actually thousands of years old. Long before anyone was building modern parliaments, ancient Vedic assemblies, like the Sabha and Samiti, were already making collective decisions. And fast forward just a bit, you actually see ancient Buddhist sanghas, these Buddhist monastic communities, literally using a form of voting to choose their leaders and settle debates. So these indigenous traditions really formed the bedrock that eventually led us all the way to 1946, when the Constituent Assembly gathered to draft our modern rulebook. And that, of course, culminated in the transformative Constitution of India coming into full force in 1950.
And I think this quote brilliantly illustrates the depth of that history. This is from the Aikumata Suktam of the Rig Veda. It says, "Their counsel is one and the same. Their mind is one, and their intention together is one." It's just a great reminder that concepts like consultation, consensus, and shared responsibility, they aren't just dry political jargon. They've been deeply woven into India's cultural DNA for millennia.
Moving right along to Section 2, Core Principles, the Blueprint of Democracy.
Okay, so fast forward to today. A thriving, modern democracy rests on a few absolutely non-negotiable rules guaranteed by the Constitution. First up is popular sovereignty. Now, the crucial point here is that you, the citizens, hold the ultimate power. The government doesn't just generate power out of thin air, it derives its authority directly from the people. And how exactly do the people grant that authority? Through universal adult franchise. Basically meaning every single citizen 18 and older gets a secret ballot to use during free and fair elections. At the end of the day, you are the actual source of the state's power. Next up, we have the rule of law. And think of this as the ultimate equalizer. It ensures that everyone gets equal protection. It literally means that the Prime Minister and an everyday citizen are held to the exact same legal standards. Disputes are settled in courts rather than by whoever has the most physical force, punishments have to follow due process, and arbitrary misuse of power is prevented. Because without the rule of law, well, democracy pretty quickly turns into chaos.
Now, what's really interesting here is how these distinct checks and balances work together to support the whole structure, kind of like a giant puzzle. You've got your 6 fundamental rights protecting your personal dignity. You have the separation of powers, meaning the people making the laws, the people enforcing those laws, and the judges interpreting them are totally different groups. Throw in the Right to Information Act for transparency, a multi-party system so you have diverse choices, and a free press acting as a vigilant fourth pillar, and boom, you have a system actively designed to ensure no single group ever gets too much control.
All right, Section 3, Democratic Systems, Global and Local Comparisons.
So we know the rules, but how do these principles actually look in practice when we compare different systems? Let's bring this down to earth for a second. Imagine your school is setting up a student council. If you set up a direct democracy, every single student in the whole school would literally have to gather in the auditorium to vote on the canteen menu every single week. It's highly participatory, sure, but man, it is tough to manage. But in a representative democracy, which is what India uses, you just elect a class rep who you trust to make those canteen choices for you. It's indirect, but it scales perfectly for large groups.
Now, looking globally, this breakdown perfectly shows how different nations structure their power. It proves that while democratic values are shared worldwide, the actual mechanics vary wildly. India is a parliamentary representative democracy with a written constitution and multiple parties. But look at the USA. It's presidential, meaning their executive branch is entirely separate from their legislature. The UK is parliamentary too, but get this, they have a constitutional monarchy and an unwritten constitution. And then there is Switzerland, just beautifully managing a direct democracy where everyday citizens frequently vote directly on specific policies.
Onward to Section 4, Living Democracy, India in Action.
Moving from theory to reality, let's explore what makes Indian democracy a truly living entity on the ground. And I gotta say, I absolutely love this fact. Deep in the Banej forest of Gujarat, election officials will literally trek in and set up a solitary polling booth for just one single voter, a local monk. This astounding detail proves that inclusivity isn't just some buzzword in a textbook. The system is physically designed to reach every single citizen, no matter how remote their location might be.
But beyond the massive national elections, the real heartbeat of Indian democracy is found at the grassroots. We're talking over 1 million polling stations nationwide. We're talking about local panchayats where everyday citizens actively manage their own community. Places like Jethipura in Gujarat, ensuring 100% participation from marginalized communities, or South Manobengal in Tripura, which earned national recognition as a women-friendly panchayat. And since accessibility is everything, elections are conducted in 22 scheduled languages using visual symbols, making absolutely sure that literacy is never a barrier to voting.
Now, here is a massive point of pride. Historically, if you look at older democracies like the US and the UK, women had to wage decades of intense protests, strikes, and struggles just to finally secure the vote in 1920 and 1928. But in India, universal adult franchise was immediately granted to all men and all women the very moment the 1950 Constitution came into force. India basically skipped the prolonged legal battles for women's suffrage, baking full equality directly into its founding document right from day one.
Let's hit Section 5, Challenges to Democratic Practices.
Now, let's be real for a second. Maintaining a democracy of this staggering scale is definitely not without its serious hurdles. Today, things like indifference, misinformation, and inequality are ongoing roadblocks. I mean, the rapid spread of fake news on social media can deeply influence public opinion and create some really dangerous confusion. Combine that with lingering issues of illiteracy, poverty, and gender inequality, and you have real barriers preventing truly equal participation. Plus, having great laws on paper doesn't mean much if there are gaps in actually implementing them, which over time can really weaken public trust.
And looking back at history, we also have to impartially look at the 1975 to 1977 emergency, which was a defining stress test for the nation. Amidst rising protests over the economy, a national emergency was declared. For 2 whole years, fundamental rights were suspended, the press was censored, and democratic institutions were severely strained. However, when the emergency was finally lifted in 1977 and citizens could vote again, it ultimately demonstrated the incredible resilience of India's constitutional safeguards and just the sheer power of the ballot box to restore normalcy.
And finally, Section 6, Democracy and You. All right, we've looked at the massive macro scale, we've covered the history, and we've talked about the challenges. But now, let's zoom all the way in directly to you. As a student and a young citizen, democracy isn't just some abstract election that happens every 5 years. It is a daily practice. It requires your active participation. It means staying media literate so you can actually spot fake news and form informed opinions. It means respecting diverse viewpoints, even when you totally disagree. And it means actively participating in community service, whether that's through the NCC, the NSS, or honestly just stepping up to take a leadership role in your own school.
Which brings us to our big final thought. The framers of the Constitution, along with thousands of years of history, handed you this incredible blueprint. They gave you rights, they gave you protections, and they gave you a voice. Just take a moment to think about that, because the ultimate strength of this massive 96 crore person system, it doesn't just sit in the Parliament building. It rests entirely in the hands of informed, active, and responsible citizens like you. So how are you going to step up and shape our nation today? Thank you so much for exploring Indian democracy with me on this explainer. Keep learning, stay curious, and I will see you next time.